I have been using Airbnb for quite a while now. And until now, I have had just one creepy encounter. So my story takes place in a hostel based in London. I was born and raised in America, and I was on a trip to the United Kingdom. This incident happened a few weeks ago. I had two friends with me that were both males, and we were staying in a 9-bed mixed dorm. There were 3 sets of 3-tier bunk beds. I'm in the bottom bed of the right bunk, one of my friends was on the top of my bunk, and the other friend was in the bottom bed of the middle bunk. So, we got in at around 2:30 a.m. All of us just quietly got in our beds, and after a few minutes of lying there trying to sleep, I heard some rustling sound coming from right behind me. Now I was lying on my side, facing the wall. So I thought that it was just someone going through their bag, and hence I decided to ignore it. A few moments later, I felt a hand on my hip. It was placed over the blanket over me. I turned around to see what was going on, and to my surprise, it was a random guy telling me to move over and trying to pull at my cover. I initially thought that he was drunk and wasn't sure which bed to be in, so I told him to go find his own bed, and then he shuffled away to the bottom bed of the left bunk. I ensured that he was settled there, and then again turned to face the wall and got ready to sleep. Just as I was about to drift into sleep, he comes back again. I was confident that he was drunk, so I tried to keep calm. I again told him to go back to his own bed, and he shuffled back to his own again. This happened and kept repeating a couple of times, with me gradually speaking louder and getting less polite, telling him to get the hell away. No matter how confident and stern I was portraying myself to be, deep inside I was scared. I was shaking because the situation was making me nervous. I messaged my mate who was on the top bunk, saying that I didn't think I was going to be able to sleep that night. He messaged me back casually thinking it was because of someone snoring. I was stunned by this response, as there was literally no one snoring in here. A couple more texts were exchanged between us, and I realized that he had been awake all this time. I wondered why he did not feel like helping me out in this situation, and that was when I found out that both my mates had earplugs plugged in, and although they had heard me speaking, they assumed that I was speaking to the other friend. So I told him about the situation and he started keeping an eye out, in case it was to repeat again. I heard the guy go to the bathroom in the room, but I could tell from the light he left the bathroom door open whilst doing his business, so I did not turn around and simply refused to look. My mate was watching, and he filled me in that the guy was walking around with his pants down, and he even deliberately left the door open to get me to look, but either way, the guy goes back to his bed after he finished his business, and we thought that the situation was finally over. Then it happened again. My mate, keeping an eye out, shines his phone light on the floor and shouts for the guy to get the hell out. I was appalled by the sudden shout, because I did not feel him on my bed this time. Apparently, he was crawling across the floor again toward me. The guy suddenly takes offense at my mate's light shining on him and starts actually climbing the bunk ladder as if he was King Kong to get to my mate on the top. It looked like he was trying to take his phone from him. They wrestled for a while with my mate actually kicking the guy in the neck to try and keep him away, only for the guy to swing backward and then come straight back at him again. I used this time to run for security. We found the guy still hanging on the bed when I got there with security, and then called the police and had the guy taken away in a riot van and banned from entering the building. What really got me creeped out was that he wasn't drunk. No stench, and no typical dizzy walking. He was just acting weird. Whilst the police had dragged him outside waiting for the riot van, the guy even head-butted the brick wall several times. No idea what that guy was on, cause it wasn't alcohol, but definitely on something to take a kick to the neck and still act as if nothing happened afterward. The guy kept trying to blame my mate when security came as well, saying things in broken English like,
"You need to come up here and see how violent this guy is."
My other mate that had slept through the whole incident kept saying the next day that he couldn't believe how friendly everyone in London was. It was a horrifying experience, and luckily I did not have any such experiences in the next few days we spent in that hostel. Although when we were checking out from the hostel, the guy at the counter seemed a little nervous. He was trying to strike up a conversation with us, and it wasn't creepy. But it seemed he wanted to confess something. When we asked if he was fine, he brought up the incident of that night. We said we had moved on, but he insisted on listening to him. He claimed that he later checked the security footage, because there was just one way to enter the building, but he never saw him enter. And in the footage too, he was nowhere to be seen. He never registered on the website to book the hostel, and the worst of it all, the cops too could not trace his origin. It was as if he was transferred from an alternate universe to ours. Now let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. About 4 or 5 years back, my family ended up staying at the motel to spend the night. We were supposed to get to a different destination altogether, but it was going to be a long ride. So we decided to book a hotel midway, where we would rest at night and then leave in the morning. My family drove all the way to Yosemite, and it was a long drive for us. We were 3 kids, all under the age of 8, plus 2 adults and an infinite amount of mountains. By the time we arrived at the motel, it was extremely late, and we were all cranky, and we couldn't wait to get out of the car. We were mentally exhausted by the long drive, and just wanted to call it a day. But the moment we pulled into the driveway of the motel, something set my mom's teeth on edge, and she insisted that we leave the place and find another hotel, even if we do not have the reservation. My mom has always had like a sixth sense, and her gut has actually saved us a couple of times from potentially horrifying encounters. But my dad was tired of driving for hours at a stretch, and so he convinced her to ignore her gut and stay there for just the night, and the next morning we'd leave anyway. I can remember my mom actually refusing to let go of our hands, making us stay right by her side as she kept looking around while checking in. To try and get her to relax, my dad suggested we go to the pool, thinking it would calm her down a bit. Well, when we got to the pool, there were no towels to be seen anywhere. So my mom called the front desk. The moment the man delivering towels arrived, my mom immediately grabbed us out of the water and rushed us back to the room. The man gave her the absolute creeps, and she said that there was just this feeling of pure evil when he looked at us. That night my mom and dad pushed the dresser in front of the door and had us all sleep in the same bed. Nothing fishy happened that night, or that's what I remember from it, since I slept very quickly. The next morning, we left for the destination, but my mom couldn't stop talking about how evil that motel was. About 2 months later, she and my dad were up late watching the news when they started reporting on a man who had murdered a woman and 2 young girls in Yosemite. Just as my mom began to say,
"I bet it was at that motel."
they showed Carrie Stainer's face and said it occurred at the Cedar Lodge Motel. Even as a kid, I recognized that face that was being displayed on the screen. Carrie Stainer was the man who brought us our towels at the pool. We've never gone back to Yosemite, and my mom is always insistent that we listen to our gut feeling, and when every bone in your body is telling you something is wrong, blindly trust it, and just get the hell off. In short, we stayed at a motel where serial killer Carrie Stainer worked, and my mom's gut told her he was a total creep. And he did those murders 2 months after we had been there. So I think my mom and her instincts deserve total applause. The sinister grin of the man when he came with the towels still gives me the creeps. I booked and stayed in a bed and breakfast once, but it was a basement room. I had booked it online, and one of the conditions was that I had to be in by 10:30 p.m., as the tenants were a little quirky. I went down early and said goodnight to the couple. As I reached the bottom step, I heard a click of a key in a lock. I went back up the stairs and checked the door, and yep, it was locked tight. I knocked quietly and softly called out, but no one replied, though I could hear some movement just outside the door and what sounded briefly like one of the 2 laughings. I then phoned Airbnb in the hope of someone answering, and someone did. It was an answering machine. I felt stupid and hung up. My prison for the night was very basic. It was a tiny room with a sink, a cot, and a portable heater. It had lots of frames on the walls, but oddly no pictures. Just empty frames. I went to bed, but not before I put a small obstacle course between my single corner bed and the steps. In the morning when I woke up, the door was slightly ajar. I dressed and went up for breakfast a little annoyed and creeped out. I felt like my trust had been violated, and maybe my rights too had been infringed. The food was already ready, so I ate it, and as no one was around, I went to pay. The landlady was very nonchalant and still a bit odd, and when I mentioned the door locking at night, without looking up she said that it was a part of the house rules, and no one had complained before. She claimed it was for safety, as I might be a serial killer or worse. I tactfully asked her as to what would happen if a fire broke out, and she said that there were people to handle that. I'm guessing that she meant firemen who'd rescue me. On a full tummy and on my way out, I realized I'd have to take up this issue online via review, and left. At the time I didn't freak out much, but thinking about it later, I was really worried about being locked in a basement without any way out. Just a sealed door with a key controlled by a couple of oddballs. Maybe they were harmless, but if that door hadn't opened in the morning, or the ancient heater had caught fire or something, who knows what might have happened. In retrospect, I consider this a very creepy incident. And maybe there was a little more to the house rules than what she told me. Maybe they were up to something fishy, and wanted to make sure that I would never find out. I arrived 6 hours late at a hotel where I had a booking for a business trip. My flight had a malfunction, so we had to land just as soon as we had taken off. They fixed it on the tarmac and we never had to deplane. That did save us hours, because if at all we would have been asked to deplane and then board another one, it would be a long process. The room where I was supposed to stay at was already paid for. I had the confirmation number in hand, but I got there about 6 hours after I was supposed to be there. Of course, they gave away my room to someone else. I already wasn't happy with all the delays, and I wasn't going anywhere. The event I was there for was in their hotel. So I wanted my room at any cost. I was polite but resolutely firm. They did some scrambling and asked if I would consider a damaged room under construction. I just told them that as long as the sheets were clean and I could go to bed, I didn't care. Now that was a mistake. A big mistake for that matter. The room they gave me to stay in was a crime scene. Not metaphorically, because it actually was a real crime scene. The case had been closed, so there was no legal issue to contend with, but someone had been killed in that room. They had primed over the bloodstains on the walls and ceiling, but had only taped down semi-clear plastic over the pooled blood on the carpets. Multiple small holes in the walls had obviously been patched and sanded, but there were multiple small holes in the walls that were easily visible. They gave me a completely new bed and TV from on-site inventory so I would feel comfortable, but man, it was creepy as hell. I could feel negative vibes coming off from the room. The creepiest part was the priming job. It was still so obviously visible that it was blood splatter. You could see where the person had been hit and where they fell. You could also see how they had tried to get up and where they had finally collapsed and died. This was in 2003, and I had a cell phone. It was a StarTAC flip phone. I usually wore it in a belt holster like Robin Williams in the movie Hook. I didn't call the hotel from the tarmac because I had a very bad reception inside the place. We landed at a small airport in Tennessee. I think it was called Myrna or something like that. An ugly girl's name is all I remember it as. Cell towers weren't all that common back then. Particularly, it was very uncommon to spot one away from metro areas. I didn't call the hotel when we landed, because the hotel was at the airport in Dallas. I wasn't traveling alone. I was on a later flight than a lot of people because I was part of the planning team. Huge meetings with blocks of rooms were arranged for and paid for by my team well in advance of the event. I was made aware that there were renovations in progress, but I honestly didn't care. I had to be on stage presenting to large groups about 5 hours from the time I arrived. I had to get some much-needed sleep and have somewhere to shower and take a dump. I was given a new room the next day. I hadn't unpacked much and made sure I was 100% repacked before I went down to the meeting rooms. The hotel arranged to bring everything from the murder room to the non-murder room. I picked up new keys at the front desk. I would have loved to take pictures, but I didn't have my camera. and the StarTAC flip phones didn't have that function. Believe it or not, I'd never even considered the suicide option before someone else here brought it up. Looking back on it, that may have been the case. I've been telling this story for close to 10 years. I'll raise that possibility from now on. I do not have witnesses to testify to my story. It is just a very odd and unbelievably true story. This was before social media took over. The internet existed, obviously, but it was basic stuff. Not nearly what it is today. We actually had a planner on the team who booked rooms and space for meetings, as something like half her job. She was like a semi-professional travel agent. The PR angle would be scary today. I can just imagine the BuzzFeed clickbait generated by 100 iPhone pictures taken from odd angles. But no, that stuff didn't happen back then. I was very grateful that they pulled out a brand new mattress and a very large CRT. I tipped everyone involved in that operation a $10 note. 2 maintenance guys and 1 maid who was not in a maid uniform. Some sort of sweatsuit. She made the bed while I brushed my teeth in the bathroom. She was happier with the $10 than the maintenance guys. They were just grumpy that they had to work at that hour. When I was about 14 years old, I traveled to Thailand on a family vacation. I was out with my mom and my sister. We had booked via Airbnb online and stayed in a fancy hotel in the center of Bangkok, which had a rooftop swimming pool. The hotel was deserted at the time, with the swimming pool being completely empty. I took the opportunity and decided to swim alone, while my family stayed in the hotel room. I did about 8 laps of the pool before a suspicious-looking man appeared on the roof. He wore a thick garment and had a weathered face, partially hidden by a cap. The man lingered for a while before he started asking me questions. The questions were innocent at first, like,
How are you enjoying Thailand? What's your favorite food?
and other basic conversational questions. But soon they became much more personal.
How many people are in your room? How many men? How much money do you have?
Feeling a little uneasy by the questions, I jumped out of the pool, chucked a towel on, and walked away. The man followed, but I managed to make it to an elevator just as the doors closed. Relieved that I had escaped the situation, I traveled down 6 stories to our room's floor. When I got out of the elevator, the man was standing right outside my room. I started to panic, but I needed to return to my family, so I headed toward the door. As I did, the man kept shouting and asked me about how many were with me, in an increasingly irate tone. I lied and proclaimed there were lots of men and I was traveling with a large group. Of course, in reality, it was just my sister, my mother, and I. I quickly opened and slammed the door behind me. I locked the deadbolt and the 2 remaining door locks. I was glad to see my family as I entered. I told them of the events that had just happened, and they laughed it off, indifferent to the matter. I was told I was being paranoid, and he was likely just being friendly. I was distressed and reiterated we were in danger, but my warnings yielded little action. After 5 minutes had passed, my unease slowly subsided, and I got ready for the day ahead. As I did, I noticed a smell drift through the room, and a thick cloud of smoke soon appear above my head. The smoke originated from the air vents. Thoughts raced through my mind like, had the man started a fire? Did he want us to leave our room? Was it a trap? Was he waiting outside? I shouted to my family, and this time my warnings were taken seriously. We met at the door and raced outside. The man was nowhere to be seen. Worried the man was expecting us at the elevator, my sister suggested we take the fire escape stairs. We raced down 20 flights of stairs to the bottom. Along the way, we kept an eye out, but there was no sign of the man. We entered the reception and described the situation of the smoke and the man. The receptionist seemed indifferent to the matter and sent security to take a look. We waited in the lobby for a while before we were told the thermostat had malfunctioned, and we were unable to stay in our room. We complained about the man, but the staff shrugged it off, saying that there's no such man staying in the hotel at all. We were offered another room to stay in. However, we decided not to stay there and stayed elsewhere that evening. The man was never heard from again, and neither do I wish to see him again in my life.